Cade Klubnik threw for 3 touchdowns, and redshirt freshman running back Jay Haynes ran for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns as Clemson cruised past the Citadel 51-14.
We're off to the races, and this is Jay Haynes, the 20, the 10, Jay to the house.
The Tigers scored 3 touchdowns of 55 yards or longer in the first half, highlighted by defensive tackle Payton Page's 57-yard pick six.
All right, so a 3rd down and 13. They need to get to the 25-yard line to convert, and it's intercepted. Look at the big fella, Payton Page. Look at the big man. He made it. Touchdown.
Clemson now turns the page to the 2024 regular season finale next Saturday when the Tigers renew their annual rivalry with the South Carolina Gamecocks.
Break down in front. Perfect. Going to Diner after
Welcome to Season 3, Episode 14 of the Nachos and Analysis College Football Show. I'm Drew Archer, and as always, joined by Matthew Johnson. How's it going, Matthew?
It's pretty good, and technically it's kind of Episode 13, but...
Yeah, as I was reading that, I was like, oh, technically we recorded Episode 13, but it does not exist on the airwaves.
We'll just be like American like skyscrapers and skip floor for 13 and just go straight to 14.
We had a little bit of technical difficulties last week. I thought it would have been on my end because I had issues with my camera and microphone before we even started last week. And then Matthew texted me after the fact that his microphone apparently did not work.
Yeah, we had 48 minutes of Drew talking to himself, and I was trying to figure out ways to get it to work with me maybe recording after, but I didn't think it was going to be possible really. So sorry for no episode last week. We are back this week though. Everything seems to be working too.
Yeah, hopefully so. It was a big week in the form of if you're a Clemson or South Carolina fan, a lot happened in front of you as far as the polls go, with teams dropping games last week. So a lot of good football. One of the more shocking games of last week in Alabama, first trip out to Oklahoma since Oklahoma joined the SEC, and suffer their worst loss to Brent Venables since the last time they suffered a loss to Brent Venables in 2018. Alabama falls 24-3.
Wow, this was a huge surprise. I don't know many people that were going into this game thinking Oklahoma was going to have a fighting chance at that, but they really came out and dominated. It's a huge win, and unfortunately for Clemson fans, probably keeps Brent Venables in Norman for another season.
Yeah, I don't know how familiar our listeners are with Walt Deptula, the rower here in the upstate of South Carolina, but if you know anything about him, he will always remind you when he was right, constantly. And he claims, I didn't listen to him last week, he claims he called Oklahoma being a problem for Alabama. I don't know if he outright picked them, but he was at least somebody who did. Another big matchup in the SEC, Texas A&M down 21-0, and College Game Day decides it's the perfect time to announce that College Game Day is going to Texas A&M, Texas next week. Aggies falling 4 overtimes to Auburn.
Yeah, this was one of my picks, and unfortunately, those new-ish, I know they're like 4 years old now, those new-ish overtime rules prevented my pick from even being possible once the third overtime started, because it was a 2.5-point line, and once you go into that third overtime, it's only 2-point conversion, so I just turned it off at that point once I knew my pick wasn't going to hit. It was pretty disappointing, though.
Yeah, so heading into the Iron Bowl, Auburn with a big upset win, and Alabama with just a defeating loss. So things might get a little more interesting in Tuscaloosa next week. All of our recap games, I just realized, are from the great league of the mighty SEC, but also Florida goes to Ole Miss and gets a win 24-17.
Another big surprising upset. This probably keeps Ole Miss out of playoff contention too, so really big oversight for them to kind of skip past this game and fall to Florida.
Yeah. Matthew and I are recording this on a Monday. Normally we record on Tuesday, so if rankings and that kind of stuff are off by what we're talking about, that's why. But as I mentioned at the top, with all the teams in front of Clemson and South Carolina falling this past week, you're looking at possibly a top 15, or should be looking at a top 15 matchup in Death Valley this week And despite not having the ability to control your own destiny as far as the conference goes, could Clemson work their way into the playoff by beating South Carolina this week?
Well, I mean, according to the AP poll that came out yesterday as of recording, Clemson moved up to number 12 just by all the chaos that happened in front of them last week. So kind of looks like a win here keeps Clemson locked into the playoffs. But, I mean, obviously it could change with going to the ACC Championship Game. But I think if Clemson beats South Carolina and makes it to the ACC Championship Game, even with a loss to Miami and the ACC or SMU in the ACC Championship Game, I think Clemson still has a decent case to get in.
Yeah, and as far as that Miami game goes, they did win their game this past week, so Clemson's only hope at making the conference championship game falls on the shoulders of Syracuse this week. So Tigers hope to go to Charlotte, which I don't think I told you I got approved for credentials. I will be there whether Clemson's there or not to at least watch SMU and whoever they're playing. Should be a big rivalry week, especially with all the chaos that went on, and we've talked about it all season long, just the continuity. It seems like somebody's getting upset every week. I know we talked about it on the episode that didn't air last week. Way more field stormings than I think that I've ever seen in a season. And we saw more this past week.
Yeah, there was one that was was it South Carolina stormed the field, or somebody stormed the field after beating Missouri, or who played Missouri this past week?
Well, South Carolina beat Missouri last week. I mentioned this to you. There were like 50 kids at South Carolina who tried to rush the field. Everybody else didn't fall in line.
There was another one that happened this past week that I was watching the game and I was like, they're storming the field for this? Like, this is like a 3 or 4 loss team and like unranked. It's not like that big of a deal.
Yeah.
People are just doing it for fun now.
Yeah, and all those SEC teams are racking up quite a tab for the fines that they get when fans rush the field. But one thing we need to get to before we get to the Citadel and our military appreciation game recap is Pump Monkey Septic Service, owned and operated by Clemson alumni Alan Powell. He still lives in the Clemson area, is a big member of the community there. So if you have septic tank issues, give him a call at 864-710-2211. You don't want to have any septic issues while you have a house full of family and friends this coming week for Thanksgiving. And happy Thanksgiving, by the way. So give them a call at 864-710-2211. When the dump's funky, call Pump Monkey. All right, so quick recap of the Citadel game. It went about how I had hoped. I saw Cade play a little bit longer than I would have liked for him to play, but all around good day. And ironically, do you know the one senior that did not play on senior day?
Did they run down the hill with the seniors? They just didn't dress out, or they like didn't?
They dressed out
and didn't get any snaps.
Didn't get any snaps.
Huh? No, I'm not sure who was. Who was it?
Aiden Swanson, because Clemson did not punt one time on Saturday.
Very interesting.
I can't remember the year, but I did see it was either Ross Taylor or I can't remember, tweeted out that it's the first time that Clemson hadn't punted in a game in many years. But this was Clemson's 6th 40-point game of the season, which is the 8th time in school history they have reached that mark. Clemson scored a touchdown on each of its first 5 possessions. The second time this season they've done so. The first time was against Appalachian State earlier this year. Tigers total 562 yards of offense. Pretty balanced like you typically see. Clemson 260 through the air, 302 on the ground. And the 302 rushing yards was a season high for the team. Running back Jay Haynes, who got a lot of work this week, giving Maffa a little bit of rest. He rushed for a career high 118 yards on just 5 carries. That included 2 touchdowns, one of which was a 70-yard rush. Clemson averaged 9.53 yards per play, marking their second game this season with 9.5 or more yards per play. That was also against Appalachian State. With 562 yards of offense, this was Clemson's 6th 500-yard game of the season, their most since 2019. Clemson has now produced its 20th 5,000-yard season in school history and 14th such under head coach Dabo Swinney. Mentioned Phil Maffa. He surpassed the 1,000-yard rushing mark this past weekend. He's sitting at 1,012, becoming the 24th player in Clemson history to reach that milestone. And Clemson won the turnover margin 2-1, marking their 10th consecutive game finishing even or better in the turnover margin. And they've only had one giveaway in their last 13 games. What are your initial thoughts on this one?
Yeah, you mentioned Phil Maffa getting out pretty early, and I think it's about what we talked about on the episode last week that didn't air. I think, at least my opinion was, I didn't want to see him after halfway through the second quarter. It was almost exactly halfway through the second quarter that Jay Haynes started taking starter snaps. I'm not too upset about Cade staying in there a little bit longer. I like keeping his rhythm up, and just chemistry with those second group of receivers also could be important once if you get some injuries coming up on this postseason. So overall, I was like pretty impressed with the team and what they brought on Saturday. Obviously, run defense struggled a little bit against a run-heavy offense, and I haven't really seen Clemson struggle defending the option like that since pre-Venables. So that was a little disappointing, but I think as the game wore on, we kind of started getting our assignments better and have everybody keeping their responsibility in the option, shutting it down. So I think the offense, like, it was a good stepping stone into a big game this week, but I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it after, but that doesn't mean I'm that excited about it.
Yeah, you mentioned the amount of yards given up. They really struggled with that option attack from the Citadel. And I think probably the last time Clemson got gashed by option team was probably Venables' first year. I remember it took like a year or two for him to figure out Paul Johnson's offense with Georgia Tech. And then once he figured it out, I don't think Georgia Tech beat them again while Brent Venables was there. I may be wrong on that one. But overall, super pleased with the game. As always, Clemson does such a great job with Military Appreciation Day. It was a cool day. It seems like every year more and more of the fans participate. The stadium was pretty purple. I don't know if you saw. Did you see the purple smoke that Death Valley unveiled this week?
I didn't. I don't think they showed that on the broadcast either.
So instead of releasing balloons at the bottom of the hill when they ran down, they shot off like these smoke bombs, and it was this purple smoke.
Was it cool?
It was kind of cool. I'm interested to see, hopefully maybe next week they'll do orange. My only critique is the smoke kind of lingered in the air. You kind of taste it. There wasn't as much wind movement, so it took a little bit for that to clear. But me and your dad were talking this past week at the tailgate on Tiger Illustrated. It's funny because growing up, like obviously the balloons when they ran down the hill, that was cool. And a lot of people want that back. But that topic comes up so much on Tiger Illustrated, and it's a bunch of just grown men arguing about balloons. So I think maybe this smoke might be a compromise that people can get behind.
Yeah, I think so too. That sounds pretty cool. I mean, almost similar to like what South Carolina and Miami do, running out through smoke. But I kind of like the idea. I'm interested to see what it'll look like this week.
Twitter polls.
All right, our Twitter poll of the week. As always, the only way you can participate in this is if you go to www.x.com and follow at Nachos_analysis and participate each week. This one is rivalry themed, and the question was, what is your favorite moment in the Clemson South Carolina rivalry? The options were 63-17, the big win the Tigers had in 2003. Deshaun Watson ACL game, which was 2014, the 7-year streak from 14 to 21, and other. People were instructed to comment there. And before Matthew and I give our thoughts, a couple of the listener responses. CU Tigers 23 said their favorite moment was the 30-0 game in 2021. Putting Green says Aaron Hunt makes the kick after Danzler completes the pass to Rod Gardner in 2004.
I think that was 2003, actually.
Was it?
Or maybe 2002 even, because 2004 was the brawl game, and Charlie Whitehurst was quarterback that year.
Oh, I might have wrote that down wrong. It might be 2002.
I think it was 2000. Is 2002 or 2001? One of those.
We'll go with 2. I changed it in my note like the listeners could see that. Death Valley Enthusiast says 56-7 by itself. That was in 2016, a big win there for the Tigers. And then Gerald J gets in saying, I'm going with 56-7. Not only was it the next step in Natty season, we got to see Muschamp on the other sideline, and it brought us never again from Bentley. So again, the options were 63-17. Deshaun Watson ACL game, the 7-year streak from 2014 to 21, and other. Matthew, what is your vote on this?
All right. I am leaning towards the Deshaun ACL game 2014. That was the game that broke South Carolina's, was it 6 games that they had won in a row? And that started our own streak. That was a good turning point for the series. Also, I'm not sure if we've ever talked about this on the podcast before, but that was the game we did our exorcism at the tailgate.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to share with the class on that one.
Yeah, so for the listeners who haven't heard this story before, probably around 2010, whenever the South Carolina streak started, my aunt on my mom's side gifted my dad, as a joke, a bottle of wine from Steve Spurrier's vineyard. And we had it in our house growing up, but as soon as we got it, for the next 6 years, Clemson didn't beat South Carolina. So my dad finally put the pieces together in 2014 that is when we started losing to South Carolina. So he brought that wine to the game, to our tailgate. We put it in a trash bag and broke it on the curb and told people that we were ridding ourselves of the bad spirits. And what comes out and happens? Bunch of jet sweep passes that just South Carolina could not stop. Artavis Scott went off in that game. Really great game. But my honorable mention is the 2017 game at South Carolina, just because that's my only away game I've ever been to in the South Carolina series, and I had a great time that time with the Kelly Bryant win.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was the first and only time I think I'll go to a Clemson-Carolina game at Williams-Brice Stadium. But I'm going to agree. I was leaning towards the 7-year streak from 14 to 21. That was a great time in the rivalry. I even remember a couple of those years, like South Carolina fans that showed up to games in Clemson, they weren't confident they were going to win. They weren't their normal cocky selves. It didn't feel like the rivalry that I grew up knowing. And then even a couple of years in there, it looked like a Clemson home game on the away side at South Carolina. But I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go that 2014 game because of all the things you mentioned, our exorcism, the Artavis Scott little toe tap there on the sideline on top of the Gamecock player's hand. So 2014 was my favorite. As far as the voters go, 5% of the voters went with other. 20% went with 63-17 back in 2003. 31% of the voters agreed with you and I in the Deshaun Watson ACL game, and the winner was the 7-year streak with 44% of the vote. So 3 good moments there, and then shout out to Putting Green for reminding us of the catch by Rod Gardner there in 2002, we think.
Fact or fiction?
All right, fact or fiction, rivalry edition. Fact or fiction, Clemson's defense holds South Carolina to less than 200 rushing yards Saturday.
I am going to say fiction here. If they do, that's Clemson's best chance of winning this game. But, I mean, South Carolina has a pretty potent rushing attack. Clemson has a pretty porous rushing defense. And so 200 yards seems like the over-under line, or what it should be.
Yeah. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say fact, and that's how, agreeing with you, is how Clemson wins this game, stopping that rush attack that South Carolina can gash you with, both with their running backs and with the quarterback. Okay. Fact or fiction, the annual rivalry game should be played as a standalone game on Black Friday.
I'm saying fiction again for this one, although having a primetime game every year would be nice, but I think it's worth the trade-off to have that Saturday, because maybe the game used to be played on Fridays, but at least for the last, all of my lifetime, it's been on Saturday. So, yeah, I prefer to keep it that way.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind it for like a random year or two, because it would be kind of nice. You have just a standalone game there. It's a guaranteed night game, but I'm going to say fiction as well. I like it the way it is, though, no matter what day of the week it'd be played on or where it would be played, I would still be there regardless.
Unless it's at South Carolina, apparently.
Unless it's at South Carolina. So every other year. Fact or fiction, the winner of Saturday's game makes the college football playoffs.
See, we kind of already talked about this in the beginning. In my notes, I wrote down fiction, but there is a good chance. I only say fiction because I think South Carolina is going to win this game, but I don't think South Carolina is going to make the playoffs. So that's my reasoning.
I'm going to say, well, before I say this, we're also recording on Monday, so we don't know how the CFP rankings are going to shake out Tuesday night. That could have a lot to do with it on where they value Clemson and South Carolina going into this game. But I'm going to say fact. Clemson wins. Clemson is going to make the college football playoff, and South Carolina, if they win, they're in the mighty SEC, and they have a pretty good resume.
Yeah, they have some good wins. I just don't think they have. I think their losses are pretty bad too.
Yeah, the Ole Miss one's rough, but then Alabama, you couldn't finish it. LSU, your starting quarterback was out. They've been in every game except for that Ole Miss game.
Weekly picks.
All right, time to review Week 13 Pick'em contest. Before Matthew and I hit record, Matthew said he kind of wanted to forget about this week. After having a stellar week, the two of us last week, this past week, we did not do so hot. Matthew gets 1 point for this week with his under UCF at West Virginia under 63.5. I got 2 points. I took the over in Army Notre Dame and the under in the Vanderbilt LSU game. That puts the season total for myself 29, Matthew 28, plus one of his preseason picks. So dead even heading into the final week of the regular season.
This week, we'll be able to tally up most of our preseason picks, and then after conference championship week is when we'll be able to know exactly how many preseason points we're each going to have. So I guess since we didn't technically have an episode, we should review all of our picks from last week because nobody knows what they were.
Yeah, true.
I had Texas A&M at Auburn. I already talked about that one. That it was a 2.5 line, and even if Texas A&M won in triple overtime, it wasn't possible. Also thought Indiana was going to have a better showing against Ohio State. Did not really happen. And I thought the Pitt-Louisville game was going to be a little more high scoring than it was. And then Drew had Colorado versus Kansas in Arrowhead Stadium. Colorado was a 2.5 point favorite. Kansas 2 big wins back-to-back. Didn't they beat BYU and then Colorado 2 weeks in a row? Also, Drew had that Pitt-Louisville game as his underdog for Pitt, and Louisville kind of dominated there. And Drew already mentioned he hit on over and under, so hopefully we can turn it around this week. I think week 12 we went 7-1 combined, and then this week we went 3-5 combined. So yeah, we got to turn it around this week. If you don't have anything else to say about your picks last week, Drew, we can hop in. So I'll go ahead and spoil it. Every game I picked this week has an ACC opponent in it. I'm starting off with favorite. Picking against the ACC here, though, Florida is a 14.5 point favorite at Florida State. That one is going to get ugly quickly, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think Florida's going to win that one big. I am in the SEC with my favorite pick, Arkansas on the road at Missouri. Missouri's a 3.5 point favorite. I look for Missouri to win this one.
Yeah, that one might be close, though.
Arkansas has played spoiler this year. So
exactly. So that's why I would say that, but Missouri has looked good coming towards the end of the season. So got Georgia Tech at my underdog there, 19.5 point dog at UGA in Athens. Georgia Tech has some good wins this year and keeps it close, so I think they might put up a fighting chance there.
Yeah, anything can happen rivalry week. I'm speaking this one into existence. Miami at Syracuse. Syracuse, a 10.5 point dog. I'm looking for Syracuse to cover and win outright.
Yeah, I really hope that happens, and I think it's going to be high scoring too because I picked that one for my over. Line is at 67.5 right now. Miami has almost no defense at all, and so I just think that's going to be a shootout. Whoever scores last wins.
For my over, going to the Big Ten, a rivalry that doesn't necessarily have quite as much luster this season, but Ohio State looks to get its first win in 3 or 4 years over Michigan. I'm taking the over just at 43.5. I think Ohio State does that on their own.
Yeah, possibly. And to finish it off, my under ACC game this week, is Cal traveling to SMU. It's a line. The line's at 56.5 right now, and I think SMU is going to handle that game pretty easily. Just hoping it stays under 56.
Yeah, and I'm going local here with my under, South Carolina at Clemson under 49.5. We saw one of the lower scoring matchups between these two teams last season in Columbia. I think you see more points than what we did last year, but I don't think it'll be quite the high-scoring affair that we've seen, especially when both of these teams have been good. And speaking of that game, it's time to preview the annual rivalry series with South Carolina. I don't have quite as many notes this week because we're recording on Monday and Ross Taylor hadn't sent his stuff out, but there's plenty for Matthew and I to talk about. Tigers lead the all-time series 73, 43, and 4. The last meeting came last November. In that game I just mentioned, Tigers win that one 16-7, and pretty ugly offensive game there. Tigers obviously have a one-game winning streak there. The spread for this game, basically a pick 'em. Tigers are a 2.5-point favorite. You get 2 points for being the home team there. So over-under, as I mentioned, 49.5. Couple things on this. Lenore Sellers, freshman, continues to improve as the season has gone on. He's completed 70% of his passes and tossing for at least 230 yards in the last 2 games. He is prone to some mistakes, so he's thrown an interception in each of the last 2 games. Gamecocks offensive line has had issues. They rank 127th in tackles for loss allowed. Could be a good matchup for the Tigers defense there. That's top 20 in tackles for loss. And then I had to look up this stat. They're top 5 in havoc. Have you heard of that stat? Or
No, what is that?
It measures the percentage of negative plays in a game. There's an offensive and a defensive havoc grade, but Clemson top 5 defensively. So what are your thoughts heading into this game?
Yeah, I've kind of already spoiled it throughout the episode, but I'm not really looking forward to it, and there's a couple reasons for that. South Carolina's coming in pretty hot here. Clemson, semi-cool, with ever since the loss to Louisville, offense really hasn't looked like they did at the beginning of the season, so I'm a little worried about that. South Carolina, as we always also mentioned, that they have a dominant rushing attack. Clemson, a porous rushing defense. And then South Carolina on the defensive side has a very dominant pass rush. I think they're top 3 in the country in sacks this year. Clemson has an injured, banged-up O-line. While the O-line has looked good this year, as the season's worn on and we've gotten a little more banged up, it's looked a little worse as we've gone on. So that's going to be a big matchup for Clemson to win and be able to win this game. But what you said about the Gamecocks allowing tackles for loss, that should play in Clemson's favor. I just hope the defensive aggressiveness doesn't come back to bite you and hit you like with some play actions over the top. So I'm a little worried. I don't have a score prediction necessarily, but I don't feel confident that Clemson can pull this one out. Maybe you can convince me otherwise.
Yeah, they do rank 127 tackles for losses. That favors Clemson, but you have to keep Lenore Sellers in check. You gotta set the edge. You have to do not lose outside containment, because otherwise you'll see what he did to Missouri a couple weeks ago. He looked like Lamar Jackson out there. I've been telling my friends and family for the last 2-3 weeks that Clemson's going to lose this game. Obviously, I do not want this to happen. I think I even declared it on here 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm sticking with that. I think South Carolina is playing with a lot of confidence, and I don't think they're going to be fazed by coming into Death Valley. And it's a great environment, but they've done extremely well on the road this season. So I'm going to continue to tell myself Clemson's going to lose this game. I've been telling every person that brings it up to me this week, in hopes that when I'm wrong and Clemson wins, walking into work on Monday will just be that much better.
Yeah, and my flight home on Sunday is going to be a lot better with a Clemson win. So I'm just excited to be back in Clemson. I haven't been in Clemson since I graduated, really. I moved out in June. Haven't been back since. So I'm just excited to get back into town.
Yeah. We'll have some breakfast tacos at the tailgate this week, bringing out the Blackstone.
Yeah, I'm excited about those.
So regardless, this is going to be a big week. A playoff spot potentially on the line. A lot of good football games. I know the season's dwindling down, but they're still eating now with the 12-team playoff. A lot more football to be played. So, and as we've seen from week to week, anything can happen. I don't feel like I'm instilling a bunch of confidence to our listeners right now about this game.
That's okay. Maybe if you're listening and you think we're wrong about this game, leave a comment on whatever platform you're listening on and convince us otherwise, because I guess the mood is pretty dreary here right now.
Yeah. Publicly shame us when we are wrong Monday, Monday morning, Sunday morning after Tigers get a second consecutive victory in this rivalry series. So, as always, thank you for joining us, and join us next week as we review the Clemson South Carolina game and possibly an ACC championship. Peace.
Peace.